Hey everyone, Chris Ward here with the CBT Nugget series on ITIL Foundations. Today we are looking at our service transition lifecycle, and in particular we're going to look at change management. It's once been said that nobody likes change except maybe a wet baby. And if you think about it, that's primarily talking about change that just happens willy-nilly. Just out of the blue, you make a change on something. If you manage change, however, you can be much more successful and bring much more value to your IT service management. Even though we've already taken a look at how we're going to do some transition planning and support while we're moving from that design that we put, our service design package, our SDPs, and put it into operation, hopefully, so that way our customers are happy, along the way, you are probably going to notice that you might need to make some changes. And so that's why the next thing that we're going to look at here is change management. So we're talking about obviously putting a service out into the hands of our customers, and the ability to really control and manage changes is vitally important. The service transition book puts it this way. It says that to control the life cycle of all changes, right, enabling beneficial changes to be made with minimum disruption of IT services. Notice the word here, beneficial. I can make changes, and they can cause problems. I like this cartoon that Steve Karam does. It's called The Adventures of Ace, DBA. And I just love how it's, the boss is basically saying up here, performance has been horrible. Did you change anything? And this person says, well, I rewrote the search and added some new pages, but it wouldn't affect the database, right? And then everything is failing. What did you change? Nothing. Everything was fine when we upgraded to Java 6 yesterday. No one is, why the performance is bad. Did you do anything besides the firmware upgrade on the SAN? Nope. And then, of course, the boss goes, it's the DBA's problem, right? Something's wrong with the database. And it's like, no, there was all these changes made, and wouldn't there possibly be some issue at some point? Probably. And of course, nobody tells anybody what's going on. That's what change management really helps with. So essentially, we want to make sure that we optimize our risk exposure. And that's going to be from a business and IT perspective. And we want to minimize the impact of any disruptions that are going to occur. So some terms to know for the small lit room that'll really help you in this particular process. First off, the Change Advisory Board, or the CAB. Now this is basically any group of people that are going to assess, prioritize, and authorize the changes that are going to happen. This is going to be a group of people from different walks of life. You're going to probably have the IT service provider themselves, the business people, maybe senior management, third parties, like suppliers, things like that. Then there is the ECAB, which is the Emergency Change Advisory Board. This is basically a part of the Change Advisory Board, but they only deal with the emergency changes. And this is going to be basically, you have a meeting, there's a change that needs to be done in order to continue on with the service, and boom, they make the choice on whether they're going to apply that change or not. There is the RFCs. Now, for those of you in the IT world, RFCs, if you remember, were requests for comment, and you'll see that like RFC 1735, and then RFC 2086, and these things that all talk about things like everything from DNS to internet standards, things like that. But the RFC here is just simply request for change. It is formal. Okay, so you fill out a form or go online if it's an online form, and you make a request for a change to be made. All the details of the change are going to be recorded, and you also want to make sure that you put all the information that you can into that request for change. Now, this is not a change record. I'll skip change model for just a second. A change record is the record that has all of the details, including the life cycle of the change. Like we started with this, we thought it was going to be this way, but then we made even a change within the change. And this is created for every RFC that you put in. And these are going to be not only for accepted changes, but also rejected changes. So the check ones and the nope, we're not going to do it all of those are recorded and stored in the configuration management system or somewhere else in the service knowledge management system in one of those places. All right, so we skipped change model. Let's talk about that. Change model is actually the way that we deal with your categories of change. So, for example, you might be doing something like, all right, if we are going to do a software change or an update, well, that obviously, if it affects the whole entire organization, that's going to be a major change model. Whereas if you have something that is simply just we have a new user and they need to be able to get a new computer or something like that, well, that might be a lot less of a change model that is necessary. So they can be complex or they could be very simple. Just depends on the authorization level that you have. And then, of course, there is the change proposal. The change proposal is basically where you have the overall view of the change that you are trying to introduce. It's going to have a high-level description of the service introduction, any changes that are going to occur, if you need any corresponding business cases and implementation schedules. These are going to be created typically in the service portfolio management process, and then the change management group over here, our change advisory board, or CAB, I used to call them change control boards, CCBs, in all the companies that I've actually worked with in project management, and at least here in the States. Maybe it's just something that's more of a UK thing, but change advisory board. And I've heard them all kinds of things, change review boards, CRBs. So, it just depends on exactly where you are and what your company wants to call them. A lot of the problems that we have in the world of IT service management is when we use the words change or change record, RFC, and all those things. And many people are like, what are you talking about? This is what I think you mean when you say change, or I think you mean this when you do that. So just remember that change is the addition, modification, or removal of anything that could have an effect on the IT services. And you're going to take a look at all kinds of models of whether it affects the architecture, the processes, the tools, the metrics, documentation. All those things are possible in the lineup for something that can be affected by change. Now, the change models that we talked about would you have a major change or a minor change? And essentially, the types of change requests or types of service change that fall under these change models are either going to be what they call a normal change. Now, the normal change is anything that is not standard or emergency. And people go, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Well, this basically is a change that follows all the steps of the change process. You're going to have the change advisory board take a look at it. It's going to be defined by the impact, the complexity that you have. You're going to walk through all the steps for change. Then there are emergency changes, and I think quite frankly, an emergency change is anything that needs to be implemented right away, ASAP, as soon as possible. And maybe you have a major incident that occurs. Maybe you need a security patch that you need to roll out that needs to happen like right now. There's no way of getting around it. Then there are standard changes. Now, I really want you to concentrate on standard changes. You might see something like that in the small lit room and understand what it is and why you would use that. But standard changes are, just think about this, they're pre-approved. Okay? And they rarely need authorization. So basically think authorization has already happened. Pre-approved. It's authorized. This is going to be very low risk. It's a common procedure. It can sometimes also be called a work instruction. I've heard it referred to as that. And so essentially, this is going to be something like, somebody needs a new laptop. So you got a new employee, right? So you have a new employee, and they need a laptop. Or maybe the new employee forgets their password, so they need a password reset. Now think about it. Resetting a password, you're making a change. And so do you have to go through the whole normal change process and go through a change advisory board meeting just to get a password reset? No. That's a standard change. It's something that we do on a day-to-day basis. So that's something that we're just going to deal with every single day. Then there is remediation planning. We need to know about that. Remediation planning, and that's why I picked my good friend Fry here from Futurama, where he's talking about, not sure if this is the failover or I fell over. Remember, you talk about it, talking about failover clustering and things like that. Well, what happens if something goes down? You need to have a plan in place. And so no change should ever be authorized without having a remediation plan, a rollback plan, some people call that. And so the way that you do this is typically you're going to be going through, and let's say you've got this many check boxes. Okay, and these are what we would call milestones or checkpoints. So you start and you roll out the first part of the patch. You check and make sure everything's working okay. Hey, it's good. Then you roll it out to maybe about 10 to 20 of the users just to see if it works. And at this point, all of a sudden, something goes wrong. Well, what do? You have to have a plan in place to roll it back to at least this, or maybe even back to your foundational baseline. So whatever that configuration item is, whether it's data or software, you want to be able to get into that or get back to that point. But we know that not all changes are reversible, so then you might need another way around it. One other thing that you might want to remember is, of course, the change manager. Remember, we've seen a couple of places where they'll talk about managers, people that own the role of that. A change manager is going to be the person that administers all of the RFCs, those requests for changes. They're going to prepare the RFCs for the change advisory board meetings, and they are going to be ultimately, once they get the recommendation, they are going to authorize or reject changes. So remember the change manager versus the change advisory board. Of course, the change advisory board is all the people that are helping the change manager to make those decisions. So there you have it, change management in a nutshell. It's been great having you with me in today's nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for joining me.